going to try to see if this works. Have that funeral march and then a couple of quotes before the session. One of the things I kind of comment is there's a quote in there from Oswald Spengler. He had this theory of what's called Caesarism, and it refers to Julius Caesar, and that's the beginning of basically democracies electing strongmen or people that can take over, they're populists, that are going to fix all your problems in the world, and at the same time are going to usurp some of the tools of democracy. And this is, the funeral march. Marius and Sulla is when this stuff really hits the fan. And I filmed this. Actually, this one is filmed almost a month after my original video, which you're gonna see a lot of it in here about Marius and Sulla, which I filmed in St. Augustine on vacation. I've just been slammed. We did do one of the pigskin pirate episodes too, and I worked on that, but I've not had a lot of time just to sit and film, sit and edit. I wasn't totally happy with the full video, so I redid it. So you kind of see it from here. I'm trying to embellish a little bit more. I had gotten some facts out of order. I misinterpreted the social war, did a few things, but I still kept a lot of it in there because there's a lot of good information. But kind of the intro leading into this is that this is kind of the start of the end of the Roman Republic. This is the start, and I'll point out in the video the beginning of the strongman mentality, the generals, the civil wars, the chaos that infiltrates the late republic, which will continue even after Marius and Sulla with Pompey and Julius Caesar and the first triumvirate, and then you get the whole second Julius Caesar's assassination and the second triumvirate, and some really stark things were done with Marius. I point out his 7 consecutive consulships, him usurping Sulla wrongfully from a consulship, and Sulla uses military power to march on Rome. Sulla, I'll add this in the end, becoming a dictator for 2 years, and for him eliminating the tribunes of the plebes and their power, which is what the Gracchi brothers had worked with. So a lot of chaos in this time period. I try to give you a little bit of a framed timeline as well, going through a quick explanation that this is almost a generation after the Gracchi brothers. The Gracchi brothers are about a generation after the Second Punic War. So almost 100 years after the Second Punic War is when this is going on. And it's 100 years, roughly 100 years before Jesus Christ is born, which he's born in the Roman Empire with Octavian or Augustus Caesar. And Augustus Caesar's late life. So by the time Jesus is born, there is no Roman Republic. It's the Roman Empire at that point. But you're starting to get into the last 100 years of the less than 100 years of the Roman Republic, and when it migrates into the empire, and the time of all the famous characters like Julius Caesar, Pompey, Cleopatra, Mark Antony, Octavian, all these famous Cicero. You can go through and name several of the Marcus Brutus. You're going to start getting more of the. And I've debated whether I want to do it. That would be one final video or two final. I could split into two final ones with the first triumvirate and the second triumvirate because a lot did happen. But it's so common and so popular. Sulla and Marius, not as much, but they're kind of right in there. They open that door for all that stuff to happen. And the Gracchi brothers kind of open the door for Sulla and Marius to happen. So you've seen how I've kind of progressed the story, the whole situation around the Gracchi brothers. Now we're getting the dictators who are really abusing the stuff that our borderline dictators are really starting to abuse it, and then they give way to even more chaos with Caesar and Pompey and others to come. So, interesting video. I'm going to dive in and do quite a few edits to it, and then let's dive right into it and go from there.
Hey everyone, I'm in sunny St. Augustine. It's pretty early in the morning, just hanging out. My wife's getting ready. But I've been kind of planning out and trying to work on the next Roman Republic video. This one is going to be more interesting. I thought I'd do it from the oldest city in the United States, St. Augustine, actually. But, kind of the interesting thing, I'm probably going to do this in multiple parts, is that this is when really the stuff starts hitting the fan. You had, last time I did the Gracchi brothers, and they opened the door. Well, this is going to be ruled by military dictatorship. So there were two Roman generals, and they were emerging, and I'm probably going to post, maybe in a different video, maybe I thought about doing this video, a timeline of events to kind of show where everything lines up. I may do a quick short video to show how all my videos tie together from a timeline in history, but roughly we're going 50 years. The Gracchi brothers are 50 years after the wars with Macedon and Carthage or whatever. Actually, they were immediately after the war with 146 AD, but they were about 50 years after the war with Second Punic War. We had the Gracchi brothers. Well, it's now another 50 years later. In fact, Marius and Sulla were both born. Marius is a little bit older when the Gracchi brothers was going on. So it's skipping several generations. So now we're another generation down. This is around 100 BC, so 100 years before Christ. And then the next generation after Sulla and Marius will be familiar names like Julius Caesar, Pompey Maximus, Crassus, Mark Antony. Some of them, they're the generation. Julius Caesar was a little boy when Sulla entered Rome. So that kind of gives you where we are in the timing. So every video I've had seems to be a different generation. And it's covered so far about 300 years of Roman history. And so Marius was a military general. He emerged, and I got my notes over here. I'm looking down a little bit. So him and Marius really kind of got his name. He was fighting both in Spain. A lot of them would fight in Spain. But also it's called the Jurgethine War, which is named after the leader, Jurgitha of Numidia. Remember, Numidia is in what's now Algeria. So they were kind of the ones that helped and fought against Carthage. So basically, Rome controls the area what's now Tunisia. They call it Roman Africa, and they're expanding into other parts of like Libya and Algeria and all that area. So he kind of grew up fighting there, and then due to his victories, he ended up becoming consul. And Marius would actually serve 7 consecutive terms as consul. Under him, you have also what's called the Marian reforms to the Roman legions. That's when the Roman legions go from the system they had in the past of the Hastati, the Principes, and the Triorii to the generic Roman legion system. They start having professional armies paid for by the consul or proconsul. They start using the square shield that is iconic, and the uniforms will look a lot like what you think of the Roman uniforms. They have the two pilums, the gladius. The two pilums are like the long spears that they usually store. They can actually store them in the shield. And then they got the gladius. And they would be pretty standard in formation, standard in pay, although they constantly increase. You'd also, non-Roman units that would be attached to them would be called auxiliarii or auxiliaries. And they would be the kind of like the local armies that they would recruit into their force. So the army becomes more professional under the Marian reforms. And so that's kind of the one big thing he brought to the table. And so from then on, the legions start looking like how you think of the Roman Empire, the traditional Roman Empire. There's a Germanic tribe called the Cimbrians who invaded Italy, and they were the greatest threat to Rome since Hannibal, and he defeated them in northern Italy. Marius has already kind of taken off as one of the greatest generals of his time, and he launches a political career as a result. Well, there was another general who was kind of coming along named Sulla. He's a little bit younger than Marius, and he also was a veteran of several different wars. And he's kind of involved. He eventually becomes the governor of, he kind of merges in Spain and other frontier regions fighting for the Romans, cuts his teeth there. He's made the governor of Cilicia, which is an area of Turkey that's close to where, I guess, just north of Cyprus. So that area of Turkey, and Cappadocia is kind of like a vassal state of Turkey. They're just north of that. Well, there's this new leader called Mithridates of a region called Pontus. And Pontus is in northeastern Turkey. Near a city, traditionally one of the cities was called Trabzon and Sinople. Mithridates was very ambitious, and he allied with, I think he had family ties to Armenia, which is another land that's over there. I kind of showed you on the map where they were at, but Pontus is kind of like northwestern Turkey. Armenia is close to where modern Armenia is today, but it was a lot larger. It controlled a lot of what you'd call Azerbaijan and Georgia in that area. But what's large chunks of what's now Turkey was Armenia. And they were getting pretty powerful too. So both Mithridates would actually become a big threat to Rome. He starts threatening Cappadocia. And Sulla is determined to fight him, and Sulla is trying to raise an army. And so Sulla, this is where things start to fall apart. Sulla basically wants to become a consul, and is elected consul to fight Mithridates of Pontus. Well, Marius, who's not consul anymore, runs against him, has his appointment removed, and Marius takes command of the consul, and Marius would continue on as consul. Well, the two guys basically they learned Sulla hates Marius after this, and they start building their factions. You start getting political parties and supporters around them. There's a civil war breaks out. You got Sulla's faction and Marius's faction, and the two of them basically come at each other. And eventually, Sulla actually raises an army and enters Italy and marches into Rome. And this is a huge turning point in Roman history. He never had a consul. He refuses to give up his army, so he's technically not even a consul. He should have surrendered his army based on Roman Republic traditions. He does not. He goes into Rome and he begins a political purge and killing of all of Marius' supporters. And so Marius had used the political system to take away a right Sulla probably should have had. And Sulla responds with this really drastic measure of invading Rome with an army and killing all of Marius' supporters. And so you're starting to see effectively military dictatorship now in the Roman Republic. But with Marius and Sulla, you got two military generals. They got their own political followers, their own factions. They appoint their own senators. Bam, the Republic is basically starting to go away. And it's kind of like the factionalism you kind of see with the political parties in the U.S. that's really starting to show up in the Roman Republic. And so then there was the social war that broke out. That's the Italians. I told you about this. This happened kind of Tiberius Gracchi put the idea in their mind, but the Italians should be Roman citizens. Sulla, once he enters Rome and kills Marius' supporters, fights that war. Meanwhile, Marius goes off and I got this out of order. The social war with Italy happened prior to Sulla marching on Rome. It was a year before, and both Marius and Sulla actually end up winning the war. They even worked together, and Sulla kind of traps the Italian rebel army, and Marius comes down with his army and defeats them. So they kind of work together in that campaign, and so they defeat the Italians. But despite the defeat, the Romans actually give the Italians go down the measure of giving the Italians full Roman citizens. So anybody, even their Italian allies, like you think of the Etruscans, the Samnites, the Neapolitans, even the Greeks of Italy, are granted. Sabines would be another. They're granted Roman citizenship. So Roman citizenship, and that would later on the empire one day expand to include everybody in the empire. But at this point, anybody in Italy, not Greece, not Africa, not Turkey, any of those areas, but Spain, but anyone in Italy becomes a Roman citizen. That's kind of the reforms they end up passing. And after the social wars, when Sulla goes back to Greece. Now I figured it out here. Okay, so right after the social war, it's literally a year after. I mean, that's when Marius maneuvered to have Sulla removed from consul. Sulla marches on Rome. Then a year after he marches on Rome, then he goes back to Greece, because at this point, Mithridates has taken advantage of all the chaos in Rome to take all the Roman territories in what is now what they called Asia Minor, which is Turkey, and then enter Greece itself. He even is in Athens. And the Greeks actually rallied behind Mithridates. He called himself a liberator of the Greeks. And so this is the last great stand of the Greek people against the Romans. And it's Pontus was the family that ended up taking Pontus when Alexander the Great conquered the world. Were Persian. It was a Persian dynasty, but they were Greek in culture and identity, so they were kind of blended both worlds. And Pontus had the same kind of identity with its military, kind of a mixture of Greek and now Roman. A lot of the Greek states had already started adopting the Roman legionary strategies that the Seleucids did at the end. But Sulla returns to Greece, defeats Mithridates, drives him back into Turkey. He would even go on to invade parts of Pontus itself. And there'd be 3 different wars, and the last one would actually involve Pompey Maximus. So there would be multiple wars against Pontus and Armenia that the Romans fight. I didn't want to get too much into the exterior wars, but that's kind of going on. You got Pontus was a kind of a late era threat to the Roman Republic that eventually they would conquer the whole area, and Pontus would be Roman. In fact, ironically, if you go off, if you count the extension, the Byzantine Empire, the region of Pontus was the last official Roman state to survive. They called it the Empire of Tremzon. It was conquered by the Ottomans in the 1470s, but it's the last little area of Rome that you can trace itself politically connected all the way back to the Roman Republic was in what's now Pontus, ironically. When he uh, when he came back to Italy, so Marius had died while Sulla was fighting um, Mithridates, but there was still a lot of Marian supporters, and he came back to Italy, and probably pro-Senate supporters. Sulla basically overthrows him, and he rules as a dictator. So from the time he took Rome, defeated the Pontus and Armenia, and then came back and defeated Marian supporters, he was effectively a dictator of the Roman Republic, and that was about roughly 9 years or so. He does voluntarily, 79 BC, he voluntarily surrenders his position, goes into retirement, lives in retirement for about a year and dies. Don't know if there's any mystery or somebody had him assassinated or not. It sounds like he just died of natural causes. But he would have, Sulla's march on Rome would have like a traumatic effect on the next generation of the Romans. Julius Caesar was highly impacted by it. I think his family was supporters of Marius, so they had to go into hiding and stuff. And this kind of impacts some of the political mindset you get in even the next generation with Julius Caesar, Pompus Maximus, who Pompus was under Sulla, learned under Sulla. Um, you had Crassus kind of grew up in that era. Cicero, Brutus, all these later leaders that and from Roman history kind of grew up under this Sulla dictatorship, and they kind of saw the whole Sulla Marius fight. And you start seeing the military dictatorship, the armies being loyal to the leader rather than to the state. Democracy is no longer as effective in the state anymore. It's the democratic systems are effectively gone because a lot of it was based on tradition and culture. You just don't do this. There wasn't necessarily a rule telling them not to do this, but people had always honored it. Like Marius was consul 7 consecutive terms. Typically, you would be consul one term and you would go away. You might run later on and be it, but you weren't consecutive. The consecutive term limits weren't a thing in the early Roman Republic. Now they are. Um, you got that. You got Sulla not surrendering his position when he was voted out. You got Marius's political maneuvering to replace Sulla. You got killing a political, the political factions. I'm going to put a senator in that supports me. I'm going to get rid of the senator that doesn't support me. And you saw, when I did the Gracchi brothers, you saw a little bit of this going on with the whole Senate versus Gracchi brother factions. But now you got individual demagogues doing it with their own factions. And so drastic, the door's been opened further. It's just been busted open at this point, and you're going to get the same thing with whole Pompey versus Caesar, and they have their own factions, and then you got the triumvirates and all of this stuff that's coming, where you effectively got one faction, and after all the dust settles, the final leader, Octavian, his faction emerges victorious. There's no other faction. He just rules Rome like a dictator, and that's how you get into the imperial setup, which kind of almost was going that way with Sulla. If Sulla had lived longer and been not as focused on tradition, I think there was still some idea of tradition still there, but it was already heading that way with Sulla. And so you'll see this as time goes on, these groups forming factions in the Roman Republic getting more and more unstable. Civil wars now starting to be more common, and you saw how the Civil War, you had Marius fighting Sulla, you had fighting along the borders with the frontier with the Germanic tribes, you have fighting in what's now Algeria, you got Mithridates of Pontus invading their Greek provinces, and you got the Italians rebelling in the social war. So in this short stand, it's just utter chaos with the Roman Republic. And part of what opened the door for all that other chaos, these foreign threats, was the internal wars that were already going on in the Roman Republic, which these other leaders thought they could take advantage of. Be a common theme as well. Usually, when these internal stuff, was it the crisis of the third century AD? There, a lot of that would happen as well, where you'd have no real emperor or constant civil war, and what happens? You have external threats emerge as well. But yeah, that's kind of where this is going. I'm probably gonna do a little bit more video and clean this up because I'm on vacation. I do have a kind of new update on the got a new keyboard and a carrying case for the iPad, and makes it a little easier to film now. So I'm going to be trying to taking advantage of that. But may do a video on St. Augustine stuff here. Kind of an interesting city. Catch you guys later.
Okay, some things to kind of clear to finish out this video is obviously I want to try to re-edit. I got mixed up on the social war. Social war happened before Sulla tried to get appointed to fight Mithridates and Pontus. It was, and Marius and Sulla worked together to win that war. I'm gonna try to edit to fix that because I got that kind of confused in the timing and events when I was filming it. I figured it out halfway through and I made comments, so there was a corrected part. Maybe I fixed it, maybe I don't. I'll see how the edits go on that because I'm gonna really try to play around with that. So after Sulla wins, Marius dies. I don't think he dies by Sulla's hand, but he effectively dies during the process. It's roughly around 82 BC. This is the year Sulla makes himself dictator, and Rome has not had a dictator since the Second Punic War. And remember, I explained in a video I did on the Roman government, dictator is like a one-time appointed position in times of emergency. He makes himself dictator. He goes and fights Mithridates, but he does a lot of other stuff that's very interesting when he's dictator. The first is, and I've kind of pointed this out in the intro I did real quick, is he removes, it puts a lot of the power back in only the Senate, so like the wealthy senatorial class, takes away the power from the tribunes, which are the ones that are elected by the plebeians or the average Joe, which basically turns Rome almost from a full democracy to what's called an oligarchy, a rule by the rich. And by flipping this on hand, and of course, Julius Caesar is going to play into some of the angst with this later on in his own rise to power. But he's basically giving everything back to the Senate, and the Senate's going to become less popular with the people over time. As this continues, you'll see that as the Senate, and that's going to play a real big part into how Julius Caesar, and then when he's killed, a lot of people don't even trust the Senate anymore. They don't even trust democracy anymore in Rome. So the average Joe Roman is not going to be a fan of this, especially as this goes down the line. And he's only a dictator for 2 years. He does retire in 80 BC. He goes back to being a consul, finishes a consulship term, and then he retires from public life. He lives 2 years. Sulla dies in 78 BC. And that's the end of Sulla. Now, Sulla is, like I said, another thing he did when he was dictator is he engaged in a lot of executions. He already had killed a lot of political opponents, but amps it up to the second degree and uses the state to do it. So he's already marched on Rome with his army. He ran off political opponents using his army. Basically engaged in a borderline civil war with Marius. Pushed Marius out of the picture. Made himself a dictator. Changed the entire Roman government system to give it more of an elitist, rich perspective. Executes political opponents using the system. Retires from public life. Leaves in 78 BC. So Sulla is a strongman dictator if there ever was one, and what he did sticks with some of the other leaders, especially Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a child. His family supported Marius. He remembers being afraid for his life, and Sulla marched on Rome. So this viewpoint you're going to see it again, and it opened once again, like with the Gracchi brothers, opening doors. I played the funeral theme before this, or tried to. Let's see if that edit works. This is, to me, the end of the Rome as a democracy. It will continue. The Roman Republic will for another 40 or so, 40, 50 years. It officially didn't end until Augustus knocked out Mark Antony and Cleopatra and started making himself first citizen, and some other stuff. And even then, the illusion of the Senate and the Republic continues throughout the entirety of the Roman Empire. Even actually outlives the Roman Empire. So Odoacer and the Ostrogoths after him continue to allow the Senate in Rome to make decrees. And this is always going into the medieval Dark Ages. There's a Roman Senate that actually makes rules for the city of Rome. There's a Senate in Constantinople, what we later call the Byzantine Empire, that continues throughout its entire existence. So the illusion of democracy continues on in the Roman world, but it's effectively, I think it's dead here. I think it's already dead with Sulla, but we'll keep it going. I will, because in name the Roman Republic will continue until roughly, historians consider it, when Augustus takes power after the second triumvirate is basically broken up, after Mark Antony and Cleopatra are defeated. And so maybe I maybe make one or two more videos. I think it's probably gonna be two. One on the first triumvirate, one on the second triumvirate. Well known. You can watch movies about Cleopatra, or you can watch HBO's Rome series. They cover that whole time period effectively. So it's very well documented time. You're going to get into a lot of movies and games and TV shows are made about this certain area in history. So I'm probably not going to hit it as intensively as some of these other areas, which really aren't. There's not really that much media out there about Sulla or Marius. There's not much media out there about the Punic Wars, which is surprising. Hannibal, almost nothing about that video I did on Greece versus Rome, the Macedonians fighting Rome. There's not a lot about the early Roman Republic, shockingly. It seems like a lot of it picks up with Julius Caesar and Pompey, and that's like the first. Most media revolves around that, and that's the Roman part you get, and then of course the Empire. Some of that is in there as well, but yeah, not as much about the very early Roman history. But thank you everybody for watching the series. I will try to keep it going. Maybe two more videos. I'll think hard about it on how to do it, and because like I said, that area has been well documented, and you can see a lot in the social media. And of course, I put my this is Sparta. Not only Rome, close to I got to Rome, but I got my shirt on for this video. But thank you everyone for watching, and I'll keep the videos coming.